Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning to some. Good evening to others that may be joining us for today's webinar, which is Stacy Pearsall is presenting Shooting in Extreme Conditions, and we're going to introduce Stacy in a few seconds. But I'd like to welcome everybody to Manfrotto Schools of Excellence webinar series. And we have a number of webinars, and please do take the time to check back periodically onto the Manfrotto School of Excellence website for many of the great webinars that we'll be hosting throughout the year. Just for everybody from an interest point of view, stacypearsall.photoshelter.com is where you can see some of Stacy's work, and also she is co-owner along with her husband of the Charleston Center for Photography in Charleston, South Carolina. And before we introduce Stacy, I just want to make sure everybody is aware of the Knowledge is Power webinar toolbar. And this great toolbar will allow you to ask any questions that you may have, and we will try and get through all the questions that we can online by answering them here. But if we do not, Stacy will definitely make sure that she'll be able to get back and ask some questions to everybody. And you can ask questions by going into the toolbar and then posting a question, and we will see if we can see the question. And we will ask a few of those questions today throughout the seminar, webinar, I should say. And that way, if there's some great questions that we do see come up, Stacy will be able to answer them live, which will be great to get her input to everybody as we go through today's webinar. So a little bit about Stacy. Hold on a second. Let me just see. We may be having some. Stacy, are you there?
Oh, I'm here.
Okay, just hold on a second. Somebody has said to me they don't know if they're hearing me or not, and I just want to make sure that we are not having any issues with audio. It looks like I'm getting a good signal. I have it on start. Okay, hold on a second here.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Okay, good afternoon again, ladies and gentlemen. I apologize. Looks like we didn't hit the right number here, or I did not. And we are ready to start rolling on today's webinar, which is Shooting in Extreme Conditions with Stacy Pearsall. Welcome, everybody. And again, good morning, good afternoon to everybody that may be attending, or good evening, depending on where you are located in the world. And today we're going to have a great webinar on shooting in extreme conditions with Stacy Pearsall. We'll introduce Stacy in a few minutes, and Stacy has always been gracious to give us some of her great time and go through some of her many shooting expeditions that she has done throughout her years of shooting, and today is without exception going to be a phenomenal webinar. Just so everybody knows, we do have a Knowledge is Power webinar toolbar, and please, if you do have any questions, you can make sure you can put those questions through the toolbar, and we will try and answer as many questions as we can live while we're here on the webinar. But if we do not get to your questions while we're on the webinar, they will be answered following the webinar within the next day or two, as Stacy and I will go through the questions. And any of the questions pertaining more to Stacy, she will answer directly to you in terms of an email back to you. So definitely sit tight if you do not get your questions answered during today's webinar. Also, let me introduce Stacy Pearsall. Stacy, of course, is our main person doing the webinar today. I'm going to be here just to host the webinar. My name is Will Holoka. I'm a product manager here at Manfrotto Distribution in the U.S. in Upper Saddle River. A little bit about Stacy Pearsall. Stacy started as a military photographer at the age of 17. During her time, she's traveled in the service. She's traveled over to over 41 countries. She attended Newhouse School of Public Communications at Syracuse University. She is only one of two women to win the NPPA Military Photographer of the Year competition award, and the only woman to have won it twice. Her work has been published in various national and international medias as well as documentaries. Excuse me. She's even shared her experiences as a female combat photojournalist with the world through Popular Photography and Newsweek, and has even appeared on Oprah Winfrey Show. She now owns the Charleston Center of Photography in South Carolina in Charleston, and her husband work together in running this great center, which I've visited a couple of times and have had the pleasure of being down there with them. She continues to travel the world teaching photography and photographing assignments for editorial and commercial clients. Recently, she was honored at a an affair that was hosted by President Barack Obama. And in the beginning of May, she will be honored getting her honorable doctorate from Citadel University in South Carolina, and that will take place in May. And without further ado, let's welcome Stacy today to our webinar. How are you doing, Stacy?
I'm very well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Very good. Well, thank you very much for taking the time out of your schedule. Ladies and gentlemen, just so you know, the webinar will be recorded today, so everybody will be able to view it at another time in case you miss anything in regards to any of the topics that Stacy will be covering today. So it will be recorded. And then also, too, we are going to give away two of Stacy's most recent book called A Photojournalist Field Guide by Stacy Pearsall, and it's In the Trenches with combat photographer Stacy Pearsall. We'll be giving away two of these lovely books to two lucky winners today for people that are attending the webinar, and we'll do that towards the end of the webinar. So I'm going to turn my screen over to Stacy now, and Stacy is going to get ready to take us through. And I hear the weather is great down there. We are getting cold weather in New Jersey, but I guess that's par for the course this time of year. So let me make you the organizer or presenter today, Stacy, and there you go.
Perfect. All righty.
Okay, and everybody seems, I'll also try and answer some questions, but let's get right into it. And as we get some questions throughout today's webinar, I'll try and throw a couple questions your way as we proceed through today's webinar.
Sounds good. All right. Let me see. How can I get rid of this little bot thing? Well, okay, there we got it. Good day, everybody. Good day, evening, morning, whatever time zone you're in. Welcome. Today I'm actually going to give you a little bit of an overview, and instead of maybe so much isolating on one part of shooting in extreme conditions, I'm going to give you kind of an overview. And I've already discussed it with Will Holokov, and we're going to do a few follow-up ones where I get more in-depth on a few topics. So there's going to be more to come on that, but let's get started. So as a photojournalist, you know, the camera never lies. So it's really our responsibility to bring news as it really happens, as it happened, to those who weren't there. And I think that, first and foremost, is always our priority. In high-risk environments, that can become much more of a challenge. So, you know, being in your home country or feeling that you're in a safe environment can always change the challenges that you face when you're not necessarily in a comfortable zone. I like to always tell people, usually ask me what kind of gear I use when I'm downrange, and I say it depends on the assignment. But normally when I'm out and about, I usually wear a shooter's vest, and I will have 2 camera bodies and 3 lenses. So I usually carry 2 full-frame camera bodies, and you don't necessarily have to have a full-frame camera like I do, but I suggest having your platforms be the same, whether they are well, in terms of Nikon, a DX format versus an FX format. And I say that only because you don't want to have to carry around extra battery chargers, and if you have spare batteries, they could be interchangeable. And the purpose for that also is to lighten your load, because 9 times out of 10, if you're traveling around in a high-risk environment, you're usually going to have to live with whatever you're carrying, and you're going to may have to carry that a great distance. So lighter is better. My 3 lens choices are, first I have a wide angle, and by that I don't mean fisheye. I actually really think there's only a really small sliver of time when it's actually appropriate to use a fisheye lens, but by wide angle I mean like a 14 to 24. That usually covers very tight spaces. Like when I was doing combat patrols, we would go into houses, and most of those were pretty small, so if I wanted to get an overall environmental feel, I usually had to put my 14 on. And then I usually, this is my go-to lens, my 24 to 70. It's my, what I call my normal lens, but it really gives the viewer of my images the perspective that I saw it in person, and that to me is what really matters, is making sure that kind of people infer the information the way I interpreted it. And then my last of 3 lenses is my telephoto lens. So I shoot Nikon, so I use the Nikon 7200, and this gives me the capability to reach out and touch the action, or get closer to the action without physically getting closer to the action, because when you're shooting in high-risk environment, you may be limited to being behind a barrier or behind a barricade, or maybe distance-wise there's a car accident or there's a plane crash, things like that, and physically you can't get closer. So 70-200, it's the lighter weight. You know, if I were to have like a 400 millimeter lens, now you're talking about really heavy glass, and that's something I just don't want to tote around all the time. Now, if I need longer lenses and to be able to reach out and touch somebody, I can always use a teleconverter or something like that, which will magnify my 70-200. Another really important factor is when you're downrange, Mother Nature doesn't wait for anybody. And by downrange, I mean like in high-risk environment. So you're going to be dealing with unexpected things like weather or even dust and smoke and all these things that can damage your camera. And then, you know, it's either invest in a really inexpensive rain jacket or protective gear, like you can see mine here. This is my Kata Pro Light. It's filthy dirty, but that's kind of the point. I'd rather have that bag be filthy dirty than my camera. And you know, it's not as easy as like snapping your fingers and getting a camera in your, you know, from your favorite supplier via FedEx out in the middle of nowhere. So. Usually if I'm running and gunning, I rarely will carry something as big as a tripod unless I'm doing multimedia pieces where I'm required to do video. So in some cases I do carry my monopod, and as I said before, sometimes I will carry a tripod depending, and again, it depends on the assignment, but I also have some dedicated video heads that have fluid head that can allow me to get the transitions and other panning shots that I need. Hey, Will?
Yeah.
Can you move your microphone down a little bit? I can hear you breathing.
No problem. Yeah, no, that's okay. I'm suffering from a bit of a cold, so no problem.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
There are assignments when I'm doing where I'm commissioned to do like a portrait shot for a magazine cover or something of that nature, and in those cases I will bring a tripod for situations like that too. I'd have to say that most of my high-risk environment shooting doesn't involve having a stabilization platform. Most of that is just really handheld and knowing what my limitations are physically. However, there is some caveat. So like when I was photographing inside of military aircraft or military armed vehicles, those spaces are very, very tight, and often I wouldn't be able to physically be in there behind the camera shooting. So I'd find alternatives. Sometimes I would use the super clamp, and I would remotely fire my camera. So the picture you see here in this picture is actually of a C-17 pilot. It's on the flight deck. The camera is attached to a handle located on the side of the plane, and I'm shooting it remotely. And then this is just a quick breeze over of my standard kit for multimedia. Most of the time I'm usually by myself, so I'm shooting on my own, and I have to usually transition pretty quickly between still photography and doing video and pieces like that. So have a look at that. And you know, the one thing is I have listed here you know, a hot shoe mic. It's an independent mic called the Smart Mic, but I also use my own dedicated audio system that you can see here, and that includes a Sennheiser shotgun mic and a windsock and all that good stuff. So if I have the time to actually capture independent audio, then I will do that. If not, I'll fall back to my run and gun system, which is the one you see here. Just so y'all know, whoops, when I'm in the field, I shoot in RAW unless it is in a situation where I have limited storage space or storage capacity, or if I'm shooting really fast straight assignments, things such as football and all that kind of stuff. However, the faster the write cards are getting and the card readers, and the faster the buffer rates are on the cameras, that's becoming really a thing of the past for me. So I do shoot RAW most of the time, and with that I usually will ingest all of my images through PhotoMechanic. It's very speedy. It allows me to get through a bunch of files very quickly, but also do a batch caption on all of them, and I'll take those raw files, put them into Lightroom, do very, very basic toning, if any at all, convert them into JPEGs so that they can be transmitted more expeditiously. Now, I have Photoshop listed here, but the only occasion that I ever really use Photoshop is if there's like a really nasty dust spot, which, trust me, working in the desert, you're going to get them, or even in high-risk environments where you're going to get soot and sand and everything else in there. But Photoshop is really my last-ditch effort. I try not to use that as much as possible. And then you see Final Cut Pro list on there, because if I need to do a quick edit, then I usually put that into my laptop, use Final Cut. So this is an example of what the IPTC stationary pad looks like in PhotoMechanic, and it offers up, keywording and photographers and credits and cut lines, all the essentials for most photojournalists. And you can do this in Lightroom, but I tend to like how smoothly it runs in PhotoMechanic over Lightroom, so that's my choice. And if you guys want to try it, you can always go to Camera Bits and download PhotoMechanic for a trial and see what you guys think. So that covers my my basic camera kit downrange, but also my software. I'm going to back up a second.
Actually, Stacy, too, while we're on the topic of gear, one of the attendees has asked, when you started in as being a photojournalist, did you start with film capture, or did you actually start and work with digital capture from the beginning?
That's a really good question. Actually, when I started school, I went to the Defense Information School, and we learned on film cameras. And it was about the time that digital was sort of making its way into someone's workflow. And then when you had the cards that were like maybe 24 kilobytes or something like that, and if you dropped it, it would smash. But I did film for a few years, probably 4 or 5 years, and then transitioned into digital cameras, which you're talking about the D1, the D1H, the D1X, the D2, D2H, D2X, and so on. Yeah,
the micro drives back then that were very popular, of course, and when photojournalism first started with digital, were great in terms of keeping the data, but the problem was if you dropped it while it was even remotely writing or just finishing a write, it would then, of course, scramble the data, and a lot of times you were not able to recover it.
Yeah, you could literally knock it out of focus.
Another great question that we've had here as well. When it comes to obviously the photojournalism changing in the environment today, what do you think is the biggest change that has really happened for photojournalism right now and, say, going forward?
Well, I think industry-wise, of course, the downsizing of the everyday staff photographer at newspapers is really changing the face of our industry. And I think the fact that photography is more accessible by the everyday layperson, that makes everybody fully capable of being a photographer, at least in their own minds. But I think there is still a place for us in this industry, considering, I could rent a crane, but that doesn't make me a crane operator. And I can certainly buy a violin from a pawn shop, but that doesn't mean I can string together some notes. There is, I think, a viable difference between those who are trained professional photojournalists who adhere to ethical standards and who know exactly what they're doing, and then the person who has Instagram on their cell phone. So that is really what is kind of changing and driving our industry. That and being more versed in things outside of just still photography. So, having good writing skills and being able to do video, whether that's DSLR video or with a dedicated video camera, being able to string together some clips, maybe even doing graphics work. So you have to be a digital journalist, not just a photojournalist. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think exactly. That's you touched on a very good point, and I think that's the big thing is you have to be able to be extremely flexible today. So let's continue, and we got a few more questions we'll get through as we go throughout today's presentation.
So before you go and you put yourself in these high-risk environment situations, there's a few things to consider. Where is that assignment located? What's the duration of the story? The political climate? The threat level, and being educated about that situation you're going to be putting yourself in. If we look at what, if anybody's following the news, we know that there is some tension going on in the Korean Peninsula right now. So if I were a photojournalist and I think I may have that may be my next assignment, I'm definitely going to sit down and log into the Department of State and check out what the current threat level is, what exactly the environment's like, so I know what clothes to pack, I know how to prepare myself, not just photographically, but behind the camera, and also know travel restrictions and the inoculations I'm going to need to get. So, I'm going to want to know what kind of protests might I expect, or is there any threat to being kidnapped? What kind of violence is there? That I'm also going to put myself in a position where I can go into a high-risk environment and be educated and know exactly what to expect and the proper ways to react to those unexpected situations. Like for instance, if you're going to, let's say, Syria, where there's heavy fighting, you're going to want to know how to evade imminent danger, identify gunfire, how to render first aid, because we all know that when you put yourself in high-risk environments, the likelihood of being hurt or injured, or those around you being hurt or injured, are greatly or exponentially higher than they would, say, in your hometown or home country. So it would be ignorant to think that you're going to walk into a situation and know exactly what to do. It's just it's not going to happen. So, I know that photojournalists, they're not soldiers and they're not part of that activity, but when you're documenting the story, sometimes it's easy to become part of that story. And by that I mean collateral damage, and you want to make sure that you protect yourself. There are several ways that you can do that. If you haven't attended a course by someone like Centurion Risk Assessment Services or AKE, that's Integrated Risk Solutions, I would highly suggest you do, because when you're armed with knowledge, the likelihood of your survival will increase exponentially. And I highly encourage you to not take any chances, just be very, very prepared. These kinds of courses will give you really great survival tactics, not only for shooting in high-risk environments, but even when a riot breaks out in your hometown, or you approach a burning building and there's people in there, and you just never know what situations you're going to come on. And even if you don't plan to go into a war zone and document, then these things can still be really great tools to have in your everyday life. There's we have the National Press Photographers Association here in the U.S., and there are other associations similar to ours, internationally. So check with your organizations. They offer some low-cost and even free training, especially in countries that are prone to having armed conflict and violence against journalists. So here's a few courses I recommend. So emergency first aid, land navigation, personal security, hostage survival, and weapons orientation. So personal security is really the ability to take care of yourself. So if somebody tries to take your camera from you in the middle of a riot, you can defend yourself, because really there's not going to be anybody there unless you hire a personal bodyguard. And that's not to say that they couldn't get hurt in situations. So ultimately you still have to know how to defend yourself. And then hostage survival. let's face it, there was a gentleman from NBC who got captured recently in Syria. So just because he's a celebrity does not mean he's above thugs and terrorism. And you know, when you're in situations like that, the unexpected happens. So it can happen to you. Just be wise about it. And then weapons orientation. I say know exactly what you're dealing with, because if it can take your life, you want to avoid it at all costs. So understanding the difference between mortar fire and cannon fire and gunfire and small arms fire and pistols and assault rifles, these help you to know how to evade that danger or face it head on. And sometimes we as humans, we have that fight or flight situation, or that fight or flight feeling, and as a photojournalist, you're fighting that natural instinct to run the other way and stay there in the action and photograph it. So, you know, having the tools to know how to tamper down that flight instinct and to apply it into these situations will help you be a better journalist. I'm going to move on to the next section. Do we have any questions about that?
No, the only questions we have in regards to anything else has to deal with a little bit more of your manipulation of images and things like that, which we'll touch on a little bit later.
Okay, great. So I'm going to talk now. So we've covered equipment. We've covered how to prepare yourself with some training, but I'm also going to talk about behind the camera in high-risk environments. So I say, whenever you're as a photographer, I don't care how experienced you are, it's just good to have consistency in your shooting. Now, I have a little acronym I call my what ifs, my ISO, f-stop, and shutter speed. And when I walk into any situation, the first thing I check is my ISO, then followed by my f-stop, and then my shutter speed. Because the more I'm consistent with my exposures, the less I'm going to stress about getting a good shot when the shit hits the fan, for lack of better words. I'm going to know exactly what I need to do, and it's going to be second nature. I'm not going to be fumbling, because these moments happen in such rapid succession and so quickly that it'll be easy to miss if you're not technically prepared for it. So, you know, the basics. Shutter speed controls the motion, but there is more to it than that. When you're in high-risk environments, you have adrenaline pumping, and the things that it does is it pulls all the blood out of your brain and it pushes it down into your limbs, because again, it's either fight or flight. Both of those require the movement of your extremities. So what you may find is that when the blood rushes down from your head all the way into your limbs, your hands are going to start shaking and your legs are going to start shaking. And what happens when we start moving? Our camera is moving. And what happens if we have a slow shutter speed and our whole body is shaking? Well, you're not going to have a successful picture. So unless you're looking for a creative technique and you're in a situation where you can slow your shutter speed down, I don't really recommend doing it. So my suggestion to you is to keep your ISO at a high enough equivalent exposure so that your shutter speed can stay quicker rather. Now this picture that you see here is a helicopter, and the reason why I went to a slow shutter speed, you can see I had to pump up my aperture to 25 and my shutter speed is 1/200. Now I had to go slow enough so that I could catch the movement of the aircraft. There wasn't any high risk involved in this shooting scenario, and the reason I slowed my shutter speed down is because any aircraft that has a propeller or any avionics like this, if you capture it and you stop action, it's going to look like it's going to fall straight out of the sky. So having a little movement helps. So this is that caveat there. But again, if I was getting shot at and it was a real risky situation, I might change my whole tactics altogether. So this is a situation where I slowed the shutter speed down, but I knew that, of course, I had adrenaline pumping. The action was happening very quickly. The background was really distracting. So I thought about how could I be creative and embrace something creative do a slow shutter speed without having camera shake, and of course panning is one of those. So in order to demonstrate how quickly the action was moving, I was just panning with soldiers as they were coming into buildings and doing clearing operations, and this is an example of that. You can see my shutter speed is 1/8 of a second. Any questions about shutter speed?
Nothing in shutter speed, but just basic question: when you are doing some of your assignment shooting and when you are in different situations, do you have any time to work on a personal project, or if you are developing a personal project which is going to encompass a series of photographs, do you try to take some shots like that for a personal project?
It really depends on what that personal project is. I'm not sure I would necessarily or arbitrarily take pictures like this to be part of a personal project simply to show my technique. I think I'd focus more on the story aspect versus technical, because ultimately really we are storytellers as photojournalists, so we want to get the message across. Technicality is just what gives you a solid platform to be a storyteller. And I do personal projects all the time. I think it's a way for me to grow personally and to have some self-fulfillment, and it keeps me motivated and to try new techniques in storytelling. So I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, I think it does. And while we're on the questions of some of the one of your last images, when you're doing the image, say, of the helicopter that you took, were you panning at the same time the motion of the helicopter was taking place as the helicopter was moving?
I was on another helicopter. This is the trail helicopter. I was shooting from the side window, and we were moving at the same rate in the same plane of focus, really. So I didn't have any lateral movement. The only thing that I did show movement was the rotors that were moving in a different plane of focus, really. Does that make sense?
Yep, very good.
Now this is the most important part of storytelling. So if you guys walk away from this webinar with anything today, I really like it to be this. So hopefully I have your ears perked. This is what I like to call shedding some light on shooting. And I want everybody to always remember that sure, it does take light to create an exposure, but it takes shadow to create dimensions. And when we're dealing with a one-dimensional item like a photograph, we want to be able to add 3 dimensions in any way possible. And shadows are really the way to do that. So don't rush in and try and put this, the light to your back and shoot with the light over your shoulder. Try and explore the scene first and see what the light is doing exactly. Hold your hand out in front of your face. Shift around a little bit, and you can actually do this while you're listening to the webinar. Hold your hand out in front of your face and just maybe rotate your little chair around and see what happens as you move. And then explore the space a little bit. So if that's not doing anything for you, shift yourself. You have feet and you can move, and then watch your subject as you move and see how that changes the dynamic.
And this actually ties into a very good question that we had earlier, and how you deal with low light situations like this. So this is I hope the person that asked this question is definitely listening to this part, because this really touches on the low level light shooting that you're mentioning right now.
Yeah. People say, well, it's a dark room, there's no light. Well, if you can see, there's light, so you just have to know how to manipulate it. And if you slow down enough and move through these motions I'm telling you to do, then you begin to see light in a whole new way. I'm sitting here in my office. I have a table lamp, and it is putting out light. Now, light has color, contrast, direction, and intensity. That's color, contrast, direction, and intensity. So even if you have one little house bulb on, then it has color, contrast, direction, and intensity, and you can manipulate it. That's not to say that you're going to pick up the lamp and move it in the room, but you can move yourself to change that dynamic. Take this picture, for instance. There's one doorway. The room is pitch black, as you can see the fall off of light, and the only intensity of light that's coming is from the doorway. And as the the light comes through, it hits the smoke, hits the soldier, and tapers off, and lights maybe just a little part of the background there. Now, if I could have shot from the doorway and had him in full light, but that wouldn't have said as much. So if you read the caption, it says the soldier smokes a cigarette after engaging the enemy in a street battle. So how do I try and relay that to the viewer? Well, if it's full light, then to me that says, okay, well, it must have been pretty easy. It wasn't that hard. But the more I put him in shadow, the more maybe it's contemplative or can be interpreted as being a dark moment. So, utilizing the light in a way to relay a message is really important. Shoot toward or into the light to create breadth and mood. And again, when dealing with a one-dimensional image, you want to add dimension to it by use of shadows and light. Note I said shadows first, then light. So color has color. Light has color, direction, intensity. And so color is very, very important facet when shooting. So the thing to use to color to convey emotion in a scene and to push your subject forward or backward. Cool colors fall back, warm colors fall forward. Hues that are lighter, like orange and yellow and red, or even white, tend to appear to be larger. So when you look at a picture, your eyes tend to go to a highlight part of the scene first because it's the lightest part. It's what draws your attention. And then those that are darker colors, like that are dark purples, blues, or even black, they tend to be like they appear to be smaller, they fall back. So if you can use these to create mood or to isolate your subject more, then you should do that. See, like red and yellow, they visually expand, they move forward, and again, cooler colors, they fall back and recess. Make sense?
Very much so.
Okay. As you can see, it's this example image here. Cooler colors tend to be calming and soothing and often express sadness. Well, what can this image tell you? I'm going to give you a second to think about it. He doesn't look necessarily happy. It's a dark moment. And maybe quite literally, he feels blue, and his own expression of sadness. Well, rightly so. He lost one of his friends just a day before. He was shot and killed. So, this wasn't a moment for me to have everything high key and really bright. I wanted to express this moment in time for him, and by use of light and color, that's how I achieved it. Okay. So, of course, light and shadows, I hope that really kind of hit home for you guys. Now, how do you achieve capturing moments in high-risk environments? I have a technique I like to call the 10-frame methodology. And by that I mean you need to approach a situation, slow down, become more deliberate in your photography. By that I mean don't rush into a scene and put the camera to your face immediately. I want you to be an observer first. Find the right background. Frame everything up. Don't jump into the scene and shoot the first thing that you see. You want a nice clean background. Spend some time looking for the best subject and the best vantage point. And, again, watch where the action is happening and put yourself in the situation where the action is coming to you versus you chasing the action, okay? And if you're in that ideal composition, then you can just sit and wait for the right moment. I like to use my military analogy by saying, don't be a machine gunner and spray and pray something turns out. What I want you to do is be a sniper. Observe, watch where the action is happening, and pick and choose which moments you're going to photograph. So let the action come to you and make 10 frames without moving your composition. You can see the example on the right-hand side. So that means a change of expression, a change of gesture, or a change of light, something like that. And if you commit to making a frame, really commit. Make the 10 frames and make the moments that happen within them count. That's the 10-frame methodology. Any questions about my shooting methods?
Yes, before we move on, most people are inquiring if when you're shooting, are you typically shooting in more of a manual mode for your shooting style? And then from a methodology point, do you find when you are working in any of your environments, are you adding extra or taking away things from the scene as you are creating that image, or do you pretty much work with what's in your scene?
Well, if you mean, do I physically go in and take distracting things out? No, I don't. But I do have feet and hands and a body, and I can shift myself so that object is no longer a distraction. By changing my composition, I can take things out in frame, not physically. I forgot what the first.
The first question was, do you when you are setting up your shots, are you primarily shooting in more of a manual mode? And that again comes in with some of the shots where you're creating some of your mood.
Okay. Well, when I'm doing running and gunning, high-risk environment tends to be very fast-paced kind of assignments. I am usually shooting an aperture priority with a center-weighted metering system. Now, if I'm in a really low, let me get back to this previous frame, if I'm in a real low light situation like this one, I will actually shift to manual mode. As you can see here, I shot this in manual, and I will do either spot metering or center-weighted metering to meter on the highlights. So it really depends on the situation. If I have time to sit and isolate the light, then I will definitely try and shoot with manual if it's really tricky lighting. But for the most part, I do trust in aperture priority to get me at least within range. And then I will use my exposure compensation button. That's that plus or minus button on Nikons and Canons and all the other styles of cameras. If you hold down that plus or minus button and you roll your wheel, you can either go underexposed or overexposed. And if my aperture priority is not coming in the range I want it, I will use exposure compensation to get it there.
What about when it comes to using extra light sources like LED lights today, which seem to be very popular? Flash units obviously have always been popular for a number of years. Have you started to incorporate that into some of your journalism style or into some of your style of shooting as well?
Well, I definitely use small strobes and studio strobes and LED panels in my shooting. In high-risk environment, you have to be very, very careful about when you pick and choose to use lighting like that. If you're, let's say you're in Afghanistan and you're documenting soldiers down there, you're not going to want to put a flash on your hot shoe and start plugging away. It's kind of like inviting enemy fire to your location, like saying shoot here, shoot here, shoot here. But the other thing is, if you're in a situation that feels secure and it's safe and you know that it's the risk is low, such as like you're at a mass grave and they're actually doing an excavation and it doesn't seem to be a real high risk place, you can go ahead and put your flash on, and that may help you get the more clinical type of images you may need for that situation. So there's no blanket right or wrong answer for that, but I can tell you that I do have that equipment in my arsenal, and when I call upon it, it's dependent upon the situation.
Excellent. Very good.
Okay. So obviously it's important to make sure that when outside, I have to back up, because being a photojournalist is more than just going out and taking pictures. You're an entrepreneur, so you're pretty much taking care of yourself, unless you're a staff photographer. You're a business person, you're your marketing person, your bookkeeper, the photographer, the editor, the everything. And it's important to make sure that you're insuring your ass. That's because nobody else is going to do that for you. So if you're going
you're your own communications manager at the same time, because you got to communicate with everybody when you're out there as well.
Precisely, exactly. Yep, you're the middleman.
That's right.
So you're the producer. So you need to make sure that you're covering yourself. And if you have a family, you don't want to leave them hanging. So let's be realistic here and understand that if you're in a high-risk environment, you're taking high risks, literally. So I know I've been hurt twice, and my husband was also hurt as a combat photographer. So having insurance really helps, not only covering your equipment, but in covering yourself Here's a few different types of insurance that can help you: war risk and terrorism coverage, emergency evacuation and repatriation. Anybody seen Argo? That's a kind of a similar situation. So if you find yourself trapped in a foreign country and you're kind of hiding out and you need to find a way, then there's insurances out there that will help your repatriation or emergency evacuation. So disability and income insurance should you get hurt, and then public liability insurance is actually more for people who are operating sort of regionally or within their own country or state. For instance, let's just say I'm out shooting a picture of my local mayor and my light happens to fall over and smack him in the head. Well, that's my liability insurance. So, you know, I don't want a $150,000 bill coming to me. I'd rather have it go to my insurance company.
And I think you also touch on a very good point, Stacy, that, of course, like anything else, when you're doing this type of shooting or any other type of shooting, you always have to be thinking of, A, protecting yourself, of course, and, of course, your clientele. Also, too, or sorry, not necessarily the clientele, but the people you happen to be photographing. What a good question came from one of the attendees today asking, what happens in the case where you may find yourself in a situation that you may come under a person that is extending extreme aggression towards you as being a person in their environment, or being in their environment when they don't necessarily want you in their environment. And obviously you can then run into problems, whether it be an attack or whatever the case may be. How do you deal with that kind of thing?
Well, it depends. You know, there are a lot of factors in this hypothetical situation. Do you speak the same language? Because a difference in language could mean a difference of whether you can actually communicate with this person or not. Now, our nonverbals, the way we handle ourselves, what the energy that we are investing in that environment may also trigger an emotional response from a subject. And so if you walk in there with this sort of energy that you own the place, that may set somebody off. And but also, if you walk in there like you're expecting to be beaten, then that's exactly what happens to you. So how do you, each situation is different. Am I dealing with a man? Am I dealing with a woman? Or am I dealing with a group or a horde or a crowd? That's a really, really tough one to answer.
Right.
But I think that when you act upon your instincts, you're going to know what the right answer is. And trust me, no story is worth giving your life over. I understand taking risks because that's what I did for a living, but just know that the world is spinning right now as we speak. And as I'm giving this webinar, life-changing events are happening for people around the world. So just know that you're missing out right this second. And if you're in a situation that is turning ugly fast, then get out of that situation and find a different approach.
Perfect answer. And again, I think that's the thing you have to do, like you said, is you look at each situation and assess each situation, and hopefully with some of your training that you've taken, you then can put that back into diffusing the situation if needed.
Yeah. Some of these things, like the questions you may have now, can really be answered through, you know, educating yourself. I'm really glad you guys are here today for this webinar because you're kind of reiterating my next point in staying educated and finding other ways to learn from others who've been in these situations. And maybe you have already, but nobody handles the same situation the same way. So hearing how others may approach may be helpful. By going to expos and workshops and webinars like this one, you're going to find different ways to handle situations. Also, make friends within your photojournalism community. Photographers, editors, directors, writers, videographers, doesn't matter. But hey, remember this. It is a small community, and you don't want to burn bridges. So make sure that you treat others as you want to be treated, and to respect them for who they are and the work they do, and be an advocate for your work, but also don't be a hater of others' work, because if they are having success, don't hate on them for that. You need to reassess what you're doing, and if you're not having the same successes, maybe learn something from them and what they are doing right, because no one is perfect, not even me or my husband who's been doing this for 30 years. You have to recognize the weakness within yourself and find others who can help you improve it. Or if there's no room for improvement, let's say you're never going to be good at capturing audio, then team up with somebody who is damn fine at audio capture. So just understand that nobody is the best at being an overall digital journalist, that you're going to have weakness. I have weaknesses, and I rely on others to help me. So acknowledge that within yourself. That's my soapbox for a minute. Sorry.
It's
Again,
very good,
don't hate
though.
on others photographers.
No,
Don't hate on other photographers' success.
You touched on a very good point. There's nothing wrong, too, with working with somebody else if you are able to do that and maybe learn from them, and at the same time maybe pick up a skill like audio, which is becoming more and more an increasing part of a photojournalist's arsenal of things to do. Audio is just as important, and there are some people that are very good at audio recording, and there's some people that really need to work on it so that they can get rid of the extraneous noise so that they can convey their story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there are other ways, like you may be an established photographer or you may be just starting out. Either one. You can always ask for an apprenticeship of somebody that you admire, or do an internship, whether it be part-time or full-time. And if you're a working professional now, you can always find time to go and maybe assist another professional in your community and learn something from them. Perhaps they're really excellent at doing, sort of cover shoots for editorial assignments, and they are damn hot at lighting things. You could learn a thing or two. Or maybe your buddy is really good at doing multimedia. Just go and observe and watch and assist and be a sponge. Whew, that was a lot of information. Do I have any questions? Do we have any questions?
Sorry about that. I apologize. We will get through some questions, but I just want to make sure that you there? Hello? Hello?
I'm here.
Okay, there we go.
Yes.
All right. Okay, just quickly, we will be doing 3 other parts to this webinar. There will be a part 2, a part 3, and a part 4, so please watch for upcoming extensions of this webinar topic that Stacy has given us today. A couple questions that we do have and I'll just go through some of the questions that we are seeing right now on the screen. Do you have a formula that you work with when you are gathering your audio and your video for interviews? Like, how do you get that all laid out so that you are using your time wisely?
Right. Well, I mean, I usually try and walk into a situation. If it's somebody I have never met before, I'll try and go in there without any of my gear, maybe just my audio recorder, and sit down and have a conversation. In the photojournalist field, I've actually got a number of questions, my go-to questions to break the ice, and then my sort of expansive list of questions that I have as follow-ups. Now, if it's somebody that I've interacted with before and I seem to know, at least have been acquainted with, then I will set my video camera up and take the opportunity to do my audio and my video interviews all at once. So I just find that people get a little scared when they have the lens in their face, and I'd rather the interview be more just as a get-to-know, break the ice kind of interview versus in your face, I don't know what to do with my hand situation.
Very good. Is there good question, I guess, in some ways here. Is there any room for doing art in photojournalism, or does it conflict with the situation? And I think that maybe comes back to an earlier question when we touched on a little bit of personal work while you're doing an assignment.
Well, I'd like to think of myself as an artist, even though I'm a photojournalist. And you can walk into a number of museums today and see photojournalism on the walls hanging as art. So if your question is there room to manipulate images to be art? in photojournalism? Well, it's happening already. I mean, there was the campaign poster of President Obama. That was actually an image that was taken and then put into graphics art and was now sort of pop culture. Within news, however, you will not find manipulation on that scale in everyday news like that. Well, at least ethically, you shouldn't.
Right. And when it comes to manipulation, an earlier attendee asked the question, how much manipulation enhancement are you doing to your images as you prepare them for people to view?
Well, it used to be the rule of thumb that anything that you can do in a darkroom goes in the digital darkroom. And by that I mean just basic cropping, toning, dodging, and burning. And really, I try not to do any of those when I send my images up to the editor, because really that's the editor's job. There's somebody who gets paid to assess an image, see where it needs to be cropped, and finesse the art that I've already captured.
Right. So your job, of course, is to get out there, get the expression, get the shot, and then let the editors, art directors take it from there.
Correct.
Very good. In regards to, hold on, let me scroll down to one other question I had here that I thought was pretty good. You did list a number of courses for people to take, and some of those courses you did mention would be like in terms of maybe knowing or addressing situations, whether it be like a defense class or defense type situations. Which type of courses would you say would be the strongest ones that you would recommend, say, a new person getting into the field of photojournalism? Especially, I guess, if they're going to be into a combat situation like yourself.
Well, I mean, if you're doing war photography, then of course first aid is first and foremost. You want to be able to treat yourself should you be injured, and have the skills to treat others. That's not to say you're obligated to do that, but having the skills at hand is very valuable. And then you're going to want to know how to do self-defense. So if you have any basic self-defense courses, you want to be able to hold your own. At least know in the back of your mind and have confidence that you can defend yourself, because trust me, the energy that you exude is really based on your confidence, and you have to know exactly what you're being confident about. And hostage survival is another good one. That's not to say you have to use it, but if you can evade capture, that's always really good. And then know what to do should you find yourself in that unlikely situation.
Very good. And if you were to if you were to look at a photographer today, or a number of photographers, who do you like photography-wise right now in the field? Say, let's pick the field of photojournalism. Who is some of your favorite photographers that you really like their work right now? If you had a few people.
Well, actually, I was fortunate enough to include several photojournalists who I absolutely admire and adore in my recent book. I've got Eli Reed in there. He's from Magnum. I've got Yuri Kozarev. He's with NOR. And Carolyn Cole from the LA Times. Deanne Fitzmaurice is with Aurora, I believe. Oh, my goodness. So many people. They're so good.
Yeah, there is a lot of great shooters out there.
Bruce Strong, who's an incredibly wonderful multimedia journalist. Oh, my goodness. So many names are coming to my mind right now. Gosh, but I think the women's stars are really on the rise right now. I think like Miriam Evers, she's a travel photographer. Oh my goodness, Enrico Fabian, he's a German photographer. He's doing a lot of work in India. If you get a chance to check him out, Tom Bull, he's an adventure photographer. Michael Clark, totally amazing. Does really high risk environments, but not in the terms of getting shot at. More in terms of like falling off a rock face. Bill Frakes. Oh my gosh, Al Bello is pretty amazing. Yeah, I mean there's too many to even rattle off right now. But of course, my husband, Andy Dunaway, is totally amazing, and let me not forget him.
Andy is a good guy as well, and he is a great photographer. So I agree with you there. But you did mention quite a few very good photographers, and definitely people that people that are on the webinar today should definitely gravitate towards taking a look at some of their work. Of course, as we mentioned earlier, Stacy came out with a book this year, and it's a photojournalist field guide, and it's basically entrenching in the trenches with combat photographer Stacy Pearsall. I do highly recommend it. There is a link, as you can see, on the presentation today, and we do have 2 lucky winners that will be sent the book. Kevin Fitzgerald in Hyde Park, Vermont, and Tim Vermonde, in Indianapolis, Indiana. You are the 2 lucky winners today of this book by Stacy Pearsall, and we will be in touch with you to make sure that you get a copy of this book. And we do entice everybody else to do take a look at the book that Stacy has produced. Please also consider that we will be hosting 3 other webinars now in regards to this topic with Stacy, and she'll go a little bit more in depth on some of the things we touched on today. And we really, really appreciate, Stacy, that you've taken the time out of your busy schedule to meet with us today, and we'll look forward to doing most likely the second part of this series towards the end of May or beginning of June once I check your schedule, and we will post it on the Men's Photo School of Excellence. So, Stacy, thank you very much for taking the time, and we do look forward to the next webinar we'll be doing with you in regards to shooting in extreme conditions. And again, please stay tuned for that. We also have Victoria Hillman coming up in the month of April, and at the end of April we have Drew Gardner, who's going to present behind-the-scenes lighting secrets, and definitely there's some great topics there to see as well when it comes to other mentors that we happen to work with. Please, if you are in the Charleston, South Carolina area, definitely do drop in on Andy and Stacy. They would welcome you and welcome to take their courses at their Charleston Center for Photography. And again, Stacy, thank you very much. For the people that have some questions that we weren't able to get through today in live, Stacy will take the time to get back to you within the next few days, so please sit tight, as she will get the attendee report from us, and we'll make sure that she is able to get you your answers to some of your great questions that you asked today. Stacy, once again, dynamite job.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, we really appreciate you always taking the time, and we look forward to seeing you soon and having you back to do some more webinars with us. That'll conclude today's webinar, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your schedule, and we look forward to talking and having webinars with you in the future. Have a good day, everybody.